Welcome to this stream. Welcome to this recording if you're watching later. My name is Nader Dabbit. I'm a senior developer advocate at AWS, and you've probably seen a lot of my videos, or maybe you haven't. But what you know about me might be that I like to build out these full stack serverless applications, full stack cloud apps. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be using this tool here, Architect. Also, it's known as arc.codes. I think that's what a lot of people refer to it as. So it's Architect, though. It's basically an infrastructure as code framework. It not only allows you to define and build out cloud infrastructure, but it also allows you to have, it also provides a couple of APIs for working with that infrastructure. So what I'm going to do in this video and in this recording, in this live stream, is I'm going to build out a full stack serverless application using AWS with Architect, and then I'm going to connect it to a React front end using AWS Amplify, starting completely from scratch. Now, Architect is documented here, and it's pretty nice. Basically, you write infrastructure as code, and it looks something like this. Now, you can actually deploy an entire application with just these few lines of code. So you can basically deploy an API gateway and also a Lambda function with 4 lines of code. Someone asked, what's the difference between Architect and AWS SAM? Actually, Architect uses AWS SAM under the hood, so it's a more concise abstraction than SAM. It's actually, if you go by what Brian LaRue, who was one of the creators of this, he says it's like a more terse version of it. So it's actually pretty sweet. It's pretty fun to work with. So I think we're going to be able to build out this entire app in about 30 minutes. And to do so, we need to go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new directory called Architect App. And I'll go ahead and change into that. And what I want to do is create 2 folders. One for my infrastructure, and the other is going to be for my React app. And I'll call this Arc app. So we're going to end up with these 2 folders. So what I'm going to do is go into my infrastructure folder. And this is where we're going to go ahead and initialize that Architect app. And I'm going to go ahead and increase my font size just a little bit. I know it's probably big enough for some of the people watching, but for some reason I feel like the quality that you get from StreamYard isn't that great. But I'm also doing a screen recording. So I'm inside this infrastructure folder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize a new Architect app. So to kind of look through how this works, you can go to the docs and click on Install Architect. It'll walk you through creating a new app. So you can say ArcInit, and then you can also optionally pass in the name of your app. So I'm going to say ArcInit, and I'm going to call this React Arc. And this is going to go ahead and scaffold out some base infrastructure for us. And then I'm going to go back one directory and just open this up and take a look. So here we are. We have a monolith, you could say, because we have, or I don't know if you would call it that, but you could definitely see that we have our front end and our back end code in the same project, and that's how we're going to be working. We're going to have our front end there, we're going to have our back end here. What you're given when you create a new Architect app is this app.arc file. This gives the app a name, and then you start defining your resources, and then you add additional configuration as well. So one of the things that I noticed when I created my first Architect app was that it created a public S3 bucket under the hood. Now, one of the things I'm not a big fan of is having that public S3 bucket. So I actually messaged Brian LaRue about this because I figured if I just want to create like an API, I might not need that S3 bucket at all. So if you want to kind of create your app without a bucket or with any special configuration, you can use these macros. And he created a macro for me. So I'm going to go ahead and install that as well. And I'm going to install this in the actual infra folder. So I'm going to say macro no bucket. And now I can actually just do this right here. And then this is going to kind of build out my app without that bucket. I'm going to also uncomment this stuff here because I want to define my region. So I'm going to say US East 1 and use my default AWS profile. And what if we deployed this now, we would get like a single HTTP endpoint and we would be able to kind of like, hit that root endpoint. But basically what I want to do instead is I want to create a couple of different functions. So for my app, I want to have like a blogging app, I guess you could say. And basically I want to be able to kind of like have different methods for like getting posts, listing posts, and things like that. So we're going to have like this get method for /posts. We're going to have a get method for /posts/post ID. And this is going to create a brand new function for each one of these methods. So we'll be having like an API gateway, resource for this actual function. And that way we can invoke it. I'm also going to have a post/posts. I guess this might be just posts. This way we can kind of like create a new post. And then I guess we could also have something like a delete method where we would say delete /posts/post ID. And I think we have to have a colon here actually. So yeah, I'm just referencing some of their documentation. So if you go here, you can kind of see, let's go ahead and look at this documentation actually. This is for @HTTP. You can kind of see how you can create these different methods, these different endpoints. So like we're going to have now an API stood up and a Lambda function for each one of these methods. But what we want to do now is create a DynamoDB table. We want to have a database to interact with this stuff. So we can go to tables. We can kind of get an idea of how to add a table. And all you need to do is actually just add this @tables directive. And here you can list all the tables that you want. So I'm going to have a post table. And for the primary key, I'm going to have like post ID. This is going to be a string. And that's all we need. Like this is going to deploy our DynamoDB table. And what I want to do maybe now is add a couple of like GSIs, global secondary indexes. I could do that by just saying, okay, I want posts to have another GSI for, I don't know, type. So maybe like we'll have different types of posts, and then we'll have another access pattern where we can fetch posts by post type. We might have like an owner field if we want to do some authentication authorization later. So we can say posts. We can then say like owner, and this would also be like a string. And then whenever we populated one of these, we would be able to have a different access pattern. But I think for this example, keep it kind of simple. We'll just have a single GSI for the posts type. That way we can have a couple of access patterns. So we'll be able to get posts by ID. We'll be able to list posts by scanning the table. And then we'll be able to query based on the post type. So it looks like we have so far about 24 lines of code or of configuration. We get rid of the white space, about 20 lines of configuration. So with just this 20 lines of config, we can deploy, it looks like 5 different functions, a DynamoDB table, API gateway endpoint, have it all configured. And you might be wondering if you've used DynamoDB before, how are you going to actually have access to the DynamoDB table, but from this function, because you have to have IAM access, right? Well, the cool thing about Architect as well is that it will automatically provide IAM access to functions and tables that are created in the same file. So if you go to their documentation, it actually says this. So if you look for, the first thing I was like wondering was like, how do the IAM permissions work? Well, it says it right here. By default, all runtime functions generated with Architect have one generated IAM role with the least privileges possible. This means that Lambda functions can only access other resources defined in the same app.arc file, meaning that I can call all of these different methods from within this function against this table. And I'm going to actually put up all of this code, by the way, when I'm done on GitHub. So we're going to create this backend now. So we're done really. But like, how do we don't have any code here. So where is this actual function code going to live? You can actually go ahead and run a command now to test this out. Well, we can actually test this out locally by running arc sandbox, or we can actually run arc.init to create all of the different code for each function. So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to say arc.init. And now if we go back to our code, we'll see that we have this src directory populated with a function definition and a configuration for each individual function. So if I go to slash like index, just our main index, it's kind of created this boilerplate function for us. If I go to get posts, it's created this boilerplate function for us. So this is going to be where we write our code for our handler to interact with DynamoDB. But we can also develop locally by saying arc sandbox. And this runs our local host here, so we can curl against it now. So we might say get localhost, and we see that we have our response. And we might say, we have these other endpoints too. So let's write some code. So let's go to get posts, and we don't want to return like all this stuff. Let's go ahead and delete that. Let's return some JSON. So we'll say JSON.stringify, whoops, and we'll pass in like a body or some data, and then we'll go ahead and create that data. So let's go ahead and create some data. We might have like a posts array, right? And the post is going to have a post ID. I guess that's not a good idea, right? Like let's go 001, maybe a post title, hello world. And then if we look at our app.arc, we notice that we also have a post type, so let's do that as well. And we will just say blog post or something like that. So let's go ahead and return that data there. We don't really need any of these headers, I don't think. We're just kind of playing around. So let's try this out. So what I want to do now is curl/posts. So if I curl, if I curl the main endpoint, we're still going to get that back. But if I say /post, now I should be able to get the post array. So that's working good. What we want to do now is let's just go ahead and deploy this thing and kind of play around with it. So to deploy, I can go ahead and run arc.deploy. And this is going to go ahead and deploy all that infrastructure. And while that's deploying, the one thing we're going to need in our React app is Amplify. So if I go into the Arc app, I'm going to go ahead and install AWS Amplify. And then I might also want to go ahead and create our AWS exports file, because for our React app, we're going to want to use that the configuration for our resources from our REST API. So let's go ahead and configure that. So I'm going to go ahead and import Amplify from AWS Amplify. I'm going to import the config that we're going to create in just a moment from a place called AWS Exports that we haven't created yet, but we will. And then we'll call amplify.configure, passing in the config. So let's go ahead and create our AWS exports. And this is going to depend on the resources that we're creating now once they're provisioned. So to get the configuration for Amplify, you can, of course, use the Amplify CLI and it'll automatically create this file for you. But if you're using some other infrastructure as code provider, you can just go to the libraries for JavaScript or whatever platform you're on and look at configuring Amplify categories, and we'll just look for REST. And we're going to basically be using this Cloud Logic Custom. So we'll go ahead and create our config. The one thing we are going to need though is like our main region. So wherever your app is configured, this is going to be like important. And then we're going to basically say we want to have our Cloud Logic Custom. And I just submitted a pull request. This actually needs to be an array. So we're going to pass in an array of just a single endpoint. For the endpoint, we're going to pass in the region, which is US East 1. The name, I might call this Arc API. And then the endpoint. And we don't have the endpoint yet. So we're going to get the endpoint, though, in just a moment. So using this config, we can now export it as a default export. And we should be able to use it now. So someone asked for the documentation. I'll just paste the link to the main docs. I'm I'm gonna release all of this code actually on GitHub. And oh shit, I just posted it like 6 times. Sorry about that. So I'm gonna go ahead and post all this code on GitHub when I'm done. But you know, and with a little doc around it. But for now, you should be able to just use that. Okay, so let's go back to our terminal, and it looks like our app is deployed. So we can now curl our main endpoint /posts. And we see that we have our endpoint returning data. So that means our API is deployed. We'll go to our configuration that we just created, and we'll add our endpoint here. So we can now start using it in our Amplify app. But we still have work to do because we haven't actually written any code for our Lambda function to talk to DynamoDB. So how do you talk to DynamoDB typically? Well, if you're working with something like a Lambda function, and you've probably used the basic AWS stuff, you might have used AWS DynamoDB document client. This is a pretty good way to kind of interact with DynamoDB, but Architect actually has its own higher level abstraction for interacting with DynamoDB, and it's pretty nice. So if you go to tables, you'll see that it tells you how to create a table using this Architect infrastructure as code, but it also tells you how to interact with the table using their own APIs. So they have a library called architect/functions that you can use, and it's pretty simple. You just call arc.tables. This will give you all the tables that are part of this project, and then you'll have like an object with all these tables. So then you can call the return of that value dot the table name. So in this example, you see they have like data.cats. In our example, we're going to have data.posts. But to use architect/functions, you actually have to install this in each individual function because each individual function has its own environment. So that means we need to go into source and our HTTP folder, and we want to install this library in all the different places that we need it. So the places that we're going to need it is post/posts. And here you're going to see all we have is just this index.js. So I'm going to say npm init --y, and then I'm going to say and yarn add this. And then I'm just going to copy this command and then run it in these other places as well. So I might go ahead to get posts, do that, and then the last place might be get posts, and then we'll install it there. So now we'll have the the ability to use that library and all these different functions. So let's go ahead to our AWS account and take a look at these functions, because it's going to be interesting in the sense to me that they created like an individual function for each one of these, because for everyone has their own opinion around how to do this. I don't know why I went to Amplify. I should go to Lambda. But like some people think that you should create an individual function to handle all of your requests, but they have this opinion, I guess, where you have a individual function for each individual function for each method, HTTP method. So here we see that we have 5 functions created. We have get posts, post ID. We have get posts. We have delete posts, post ID. Then we have our index, and then we have our posts, you posts. So I think the 3 methods that we'll work with are going to be get post by ID, get posts, and post. I think those are the 3 that will give us a good idea around how all this stuff works. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and grab some code that I used before, because that way I don't have to write everything from scratch. And I think the first thing we might want to look at is how to list posts or get posts. And to mess around with this, we're going to go to, let's see here, post. Yeah, let's go to get posts. I think that's exactly what we need anyway. So I'm going to use the data.posts. Okay. So basically I want to use this architect library, and I'm going to kind of require it, and I'm going to call it arc. And then in this function, we don't really need anything in our arguments because we're just calling a GET request. So we know we want to scan this entire table, return all of this data. So we're going to say we want the data to be arc.tables. And then maybe let's console this log out, or console.log this out. And just kind of see what that data looks like. And then we want to say posts are equal to data.post.scan. We don't pass in any arguments there. And then we just return setting cores, headers, and we return the body as the posts. So this should work for us to go ahead and scan and like return an array of posts. The API for this is kind of well documented there. Oh, it looks like I'm returning that as well. I don't need that. I just need to return this. So yeah, I mean, I guess we could, I don't know if we need cores for an error, but let's do that as well. So we have that going on. We're basically, again, we're calling this arc.tables method, gives us all of our tables, and then we decide which table we want to work with by calling data.name of the table. So let's do now get post by ID. And this is a little different because we're going to be using part of the request to find out what the actual path name is. Because we need to kind of like, get that /ID off of this path for us to be able to use it. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab this code that I wrote earlier. And it's going to look a little different because I was using accounts. And then we're going to be using the post ID. And then I'll walk through this code. All right, so we're again using this architect import. And then using this request, we can look for the path parameters. The path parameters are going to be something like API name /1234. And the parameters will be having the name of this post ID as part of the arguments here. So any other parameters that were there would also be available. But the only thing we're working with is post ID. And how do I know that? Well, the documentation is pretty clear about that. It's pretty nice. So if you go to HTTP functions, you can look for the request payload right here. The request payload tells you that you can get this path parameters. But you could also just console.log the request, which is pretty cool also to kind of see what's available there. So let's take a quick look. We have the post ID, which is the request.pathParameters. We have the post ID. And the post ID looks like it should come in like that. We're calling post.get, passing in the post ID. Okay, cool. That looks good. The last thing we might want to do would be to create a new post, right? Because we don't really have a way to create a post. So to do that, we're going to go to posts. And I will grab a chunk of code that I wrote for this function as well. This is going to be a little different, again, because I'm using a different table name. And we're going to be passing in a post instead of an account. Okay, cool. So I'm going to delete comments. So we're importing architect/functions again. We're then, I'm going to check, looks like, make sure I don't have any comments or any questions. Yeah, we're importing this arc library. We're calling a new method that we haven't used before yet, called arc.http.helpers, and we're using the body parser because we just want the request body out of the request. This body is going to have our post. So we can then use that post to store it in DynamoDB. So once we have that body, we can then get the table, and the data, the table is going to be data.posts. And then we can just say .put, passing in the object that we want to store. In DynamoDB, this is typically, I think, called the item. And this is with arc.codes, I guess, they just call it the, you just pass in whatever directly into the argument here. And then we're just going to return, basically saying, we want to return a body, actually, saying we successfully created a new post. And we want to be able to access this, from a client. So we add the cores headers here. The last thing we might want to do is let's go ahead and take a look at this DynamoDB table because we created it and we haven't really, put anything into it yet. So let's see if we can find the post table. So this is the post table. Let's go ahead and open it up. Whoops. And we don't have any items in there, but it might be cool to check that out in just a moment. But this is the table that was created by our architect project. So we've made a bunch of updates. Let's try this out. Let's go ahead and deploy this thing. So I want to go ahead and run arc deploy, and this should go ahead and deploy the updates to our functions. We didn't really change anything in our, in our database. All we did was update some of our. Let's see here. All we did was update. I'm sorry, we didn't update anything in our configuration. We only updated the code for our functions. So. After this is deployed, we might make a curl command against it just to kind of see if it's working. All right, so the deployment is done. So let's go ahead and try to curl our endpoint /posts. Oh, you know what? I probably should not have deleted that endpoint. Let me try to get that endpoint back. I wonder if there's anywhere within the project I can actually view that endpoint. No, I don't think it's going to be there. Yeah, I should have probably saved that. So let me just run arc deploy again. Oh, you know what? I do have the endpoint. What am I talking about? It's actually in our AWS exports file. Okay, so let's try to curl this again. So we want to curl this endpoint /posts. And this is actually now going to be calling DynamoDB, which should return like an empty array along with maybe some metadata. So that's perfect. It looks like we have our empty items array. We have some additional metadata about our our API. So now let's call a post command to go ahead and create a new post. So I think I have a pretty good example of what this would look like. So we're going to call curl. We're going to pass in some data. We're passing in our endpoint. We're passing in the content type. And we're passing in a post. So the post needs to have a few fields. The fields that we're working with, I forgot again. So let's go back and look at them again. A post ID, a type, and I think there was one other thing. Forgot now. Anyway, so we're gonna start with the post ID and the type, and maybe we'll pass in some content. So the type is going to be a blog. Okay, that's fine. The content is going to be like hello world. And then for the post ID, we'll just make this like 001. All right, let's try that. Looks like we successfully created a new post. So let's go ahead and curl /posts. And there we go. We see that we have created a post. So the next thing we might want to do is just create one more post. So I'm going to go ahead over here in another window and write some information so I don't have to do that in the terminal. So my second post. And we'll paste that here. We created 2 posts now. And if we scan, we see that our scan count is at 2. So we've created, we've curled to list. The last thing maybe we want to do is get a post by ID. So let's do that. So curl, HTTP, whatever. And then we want to pass in /001. And there we go. We have our single post ID coming back as well. So we're getting a post by ID. That's working. Our getting an array of posts is working, and our creating a post is working. The last thing we want to do is test this out in our front-end app. So I'm going to go to arc app and run npm start. And I will open up our app.js and start writing some React. So in app.js, I will import use state and use effect. And then I'll also import the API category from AWS Amplify. And then I will create some state here. So we'll have like a posts, set posts. And this will be equal to use state with an empty array. And then I will say use effect. And then we're going to have a function called fetch posts that we'll go ahead and create here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call API.get. And then the API.get needs to be passed in the name of the API and then the path. So for all of our posts, we're going to be getting the /posts path. And for the app name, it's going to be this arc API. So I can say arc API /posts. And then maybe for now, I'll just console.log the data. And then we'll go ahead and try this out. So looks like Arc API doesn't exist in our configuration. So let's see what's going on with that. If I go to my AWS exports file, US East 1, AWS Custom Cloud Logic, Arc API, endpoints. This all looks proper. So export default config, amplify.configure. And we're still getting that issue. So let me go to one more area and see if I'm missing something. And I have some configuration that I've used before. So let me kind of just drop this next to this configuration to see if I'm missing anything. AWS project region, that's what it needs to be set as. Okay. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so our data is coming back. So we have data.items. So the data.items is what we want to use to update our state. So the thing that I changed was in our configuration, this needs to be set to AWS_project region. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call set posts, passing in the data.items, and then we can map over the posts in our main app. So maybe we'll like return the post title and the post content. And there we go. We have our full stack serverless app running with arc.codes, AWS Lambda, DynamoDB, API Gateway, and AWS Amplify. So that's kind of it. I just wanted to kind of show off how that works, Architect, but also how AWS Amplify, is configurable with almost all these infrastructure as code providers. I'm a big fan of infrastructure as code. This one is my first time using it this week, and it's really, really cool. So definitely recommend checking it out. If you're not already subscribed to my YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to that. Check it out. Follow me on Twitter, Dabbit3, and I'll see you next time.